All right, check one, two, check one, two. I'm going to be doing something a little different today. I wanted to make a video talking about, I wanted to make a long format video just kind of talking about my sobriety journey. I'm not sure if I should look at the camera or look away. I don't know. I haven't really done one of these before, so this may suck, but hopefully it's worth something. But I wanted to make a video talking about my sobriety journey. I don't know. I was at the gym today and I was just feeling like called to speak on this. I just like feel it in the air that somebody needs to hear this. And it's not like the most optimal day to do this. I kind of feel like shit. My stomach's killing me. I have a huge zit right here on camera side. Um, but who cares? I mean, there's never gonna be a perfect time to do it. So I figured I'd start. Um, so if you've been following my music journey, some of this stuff might be redundant, but I'm gonna kind of speak like people don't know because I'm sure this will reach somebody new. But I'm 4 years sober, just over 4 years, 4.5 years sober from drugs, alcohol, um, and it's been getting sober has been one of the most transformative things about my life, obviously. And so I just kind of wanted to do a video talking about how I got into drugs, what that journey was like, how I got sober, how I maintained it, the slip ups, just kind of do it all. And I figured I'd just do a long video and don't cut it. And yeah, here goes nothing. So, um, my name is Kasky. I'm 31 years old. I live in Florida and I'm a music artist. And like I said, I've been sober now for 4.5 years from drugs and alcohol. And I'll just kind of tell the whole story, I guess. So, growing up, I some of my earliest memories revolve around drugs. Like, I don't mean to like bash anybody in my family, but just in order to tell the story, I have to be transparent. And I love all these people dearly, and all of us have our own struggles that equate us and turn us into the people that we are. So, just disclaimer. But some of my earliest memories growing up have to do with drugs. I think one of the first memories that I have as a kid is my parents coming to tell me that my older sibling, my sister, she was taking pills from my dad, and I'll speak more on this later as the story develops. But that was one of the first memories that I have as a kid, and I just remember it feeling really weird and like feeling the energy weird in my house. And I think that was, I couldn't have been older than 5 or 6 or 7. I don't know. I'm bad with kids' ages. But I just remember becoming more aware of like the shift in energy in my house around that time. And so from then on, a lot of the memories that I have were me being suspicious of my sister, just trying to be observant, um, and just feeling like there was something off in my house and that it was weird and I didn't understand it. And like another early memory that I have, I was in third grade and my sister and a friend of hers picked me up, and I remember them talking about going to get a 8 ball, and I played pool like at that age. I'd played pool before, but I knew that it wasn't that, and it was just this weird thing that stuck out in my head. And so I have all these like scattered memories from really early on in my childhood about just being around drugs, witnessing drugs, coming home to strangers at the house, and you know being in the hospital when my sister would overdose, or going to rehabs as a family to talk with her, and just all this energy that it felt like drugs is like the main thing I can pull from when I think about my childhood. Just memories surrounding that, hospitals and panics, and like I said, rehabs and jails and all these things, going to them at an early age and being like, what the fuck is this? And not really like understanding why my sister was doing that stuff. And yeah, just again, it all led to me feeling really isolated and alone, and it wasn't something that like my family talked about openly, or we like had these discussions. I just, being an observant kid or going to them, I'd get the necessary bits of information, but it was always this weird energy. And so I was always like scared of drugs personally, like even smoking weed and stuff like that scared me because I, grown up with this example. And so right around like probably 15, the summer between middle school going into high school was the first time that I started like drinking and smoking. And I just had friends that brought alcohol around, or I had a friend, Ben, who we would stay at his house, and his parents wouldn't supervise us, or my brother Dax, and we would drink alcohol. And then eventually that led to me smoking weed for the first time. And all these were like truthfully cool experiences as a kid because I was so scared of the stigma of drugs. And um, these things started like leading me to a sense of escape, or yeah, just feeling like I was creating this own world that I lived in. And so um, for most of like 15, going into 16, it was like drinking as much as possible. I had a lot of freedom as a kid, so I'd hang out with other kids, and it was drinking and smoking. And right around when I was 15, maybe 6 months before my 16th birthday, my sister was at the house with me one day, and she starts telling me, like, she's like, you don't really understand the full story with like me and dad and stuff. And I remember being like, what are you talking about? And so she discloses to me um, that my dad does drugs, and that my dad has smoked and done drugs with her for most of my life. And this was like huge shock to me at the time because, growing up, my mom was a school teacher. My dad was a construction worker, as far as I knew. He rode motorcycles. I always knew he was like a little on the outsides, but um, I'd never thought of him as doing drugs. I never suspected that. I always felt like it was this isolated thing that my sister was going through. And so she discloses to me like all these stories about how since she was a teenager, dad had smoked weed with her, and he had done coke with her. And when I was in, just to backtrack a little, when I was in third grade, my dad was in a construction accident, and he lost the tips of 8 of his fingers. And so it was this big traumatic thing at the time, and he had bandages over his fingers. Took a long time to heal. He was out of work for a really long time. Well, at that time, my dad was put on Oxycontin, and this is pre opioid epidemic and pre people like really understanding prescription medication and how serious those things were. And so she discloses to me, yeah, all these years, me and dad have done drugs together, and dad's been on opioids. And I hope this straw hasn't been in the way of this video the whole time. That would be super annoying. But, she tells me dad and I have done drugs all these years together, and dad's totally not a saint. I've helped him get drugs. He's helped me get drugs. I help him with dealing drugs. He's been selling coke and selling pills and things like this all these years. He's always done that. And when he was 19 and 20, he used to get kilos of cocaine. And so hitting me with all these things about my dad that I was like super shocked about. And then I started to observe it and be like, holy crap, that is so true. And my dad started to pick up on that I was smoking and drinking. And so we had this unspoken like thing where we'd like make little hints at each other and stuff like that. So, but he never did any of those things with me, because by the time I was that age, my sister's addiction had got more serious, and I think there was a lot of like guilt from him around surrounding that. And so, couple months before my 16th birthday, my dad was I don't even remember the full story, but basically he had like got switched, his medication switched, and he had anxiety, and so he took anxiety medication, he took pain medication, and they had switched him to like antidepressants, I think. And at least the story as I recall it and what was told to me, and they had switched his medication to antidepressants. And when you have anxiety and you get put on antidepressants, there, wires can get crossed in your brain. And so he went through this like manic state where he was going through some sort of psychosis, and for months on at a time he made me tell my mom that I smoked weed and all these things that were like totally out of his character. And he wasn't working and he was staying at home. And I would come home he would call me when I was at school and tell me he needs me to come home, and I come home and he'd be floating in the pool and like talking to God and all these like at the time really weird things, because my dad was just not that kind of guy. He was this kind of just stoic badass type of dude. And it was a really really confusing time for me. And so I started getting in trouble for all these things that I was doing that he knew I was doing. And eventually my mom and my dad were going through a divorce because he had in this state he had come clean to my mom about all these things, years of using drugs and doing drugs with my sister and all these bad things that he had done. And obviously my mom is like a total like saint in my eyes. She's had a really rough life, rougher than any of the things I'm describing. And but she's never used drugs or anything like that. And so she was totally blindsided, and obviously felt like her partner had been lying to her all these years. So they were going through divorce. My dad starts living in New Smyrna Beach with like a construction buddy, like in a trailer on his property, which was like, and just riding his bike all the time, which was super just weird to me because my dad was like a get money, hustle, provide type of dude. And so he was real absent for a long time, or for these next couple months. And I went and visited him one time while he was out there. And this is like, I think like a big regret that I hold on to. But so I'd had a license at the time, so I had to be 16 at this time. So I was a junior in high school, and my dad wanted to hang out with me in New Smyrna, so I drove out there, and I had a blunt. I had never smoked with my dad, but I smoked it on the way there because I felt like he wasn't going to smoke with me. And when I got there, I hopped in his truck. We met for food, and then we rode around in his truck. And I could tell he was like messed up, more messed up than I had ever seen him, because he had been doing drugs all these years, but I never noticed it or felt like it. And this time his eyes were super bloodshot and he was, slow, and I just knew something was off. And after we ate at the Osteen Diner, we drove around in his truck, and he made us both mixed drinks, Jack and Cokes. And he smoked in front of me, and he was like, if you got a blunt, you can smoke, but I'm not going to pass this to you. I can't do that because I did things like that with your sister. And I just remember being like, fuck, like I shouldn't have smoked that. But anyway, we sipped Jack and Cokes, which was weird because he never offered me alcohol or anything like that before. It was the one time it ever happened in my life. And we rode around New Smyrna Beach. We parked somewhere, walked on the beach. And the whole time my dad's like in this real abstract place, I guess. He's talking about life. And he asked me if I'd like to move out to the beach with him or if I want to live in the mountains. Like, where do I want to live with him? And I was so angry with him at the time that I just like blew it off. I was really mad at him, for what I felt like was him separating my mom and the stuff he was going through with my sister. And so I just had a lot of anger in me. And so I didn't entertain those things a lot. But when you're a kid, you kind of just view your parents as like these stoic, gonna be there forever type of things. And so I went back home, and maybe less than a week later, my dad came home over the weekend. And that Monday, I left for school. It was 4:20, and I left early, and he was sitting on the couch like he always was. And he made some sort of passing joke about how I was leaving early on 4:20, and I was still so mad at him. And I was like, yeah, I'm leaving. And I don't even think I said I love you. There was nothing memorable about the goodbye. And that would be the last time that I ever saw him. And so I left. I went to school. I didn't even end up smoking before school, and I got pulled out right around second period, and from a police officer. And I was like, "Oh shit, I'm in trouble." And the cop said he needed to take me to my mom's school because my mom was an elementary school teacher down the road. And when I got to my mom's school, they walked me into this conference room where there's multiple teachers, and my mom is, I'm gonna try not to cry. She is the most broken I've ever seen her look, and I knew instantly that my dad was dead. And so she tells me that my dad had committed suicide at the house that day, and my neighbor found him. And my just, world collapsed. Like prior to this, I think I had a really surface layer type of view of the world. Even with growing up around the drugs and even with this stuff that I've been exposed to at a younger age, I just had this totally lacking depth type of view of the world. And so, in an instant, my day just shatters. And I ran from the school. I cried more than I've ever cried. And I got brought to the house, and I wasn't allowed to go inside because police were in there. And I just was absolutely destroyed. And at one point in the day, I remember my mom like telling me to go hang out with my buddy Eddie and Free to just get away from the house. And they didn't know how to deal with it because, we're 16 at the time, and they're just like, none of us have ever been through anything like this. And we try to put on this X-Men movie, and I remember in the first scene of the X-Men movie, this kid's dad dies. And it was like I couldn't escape it, and so I just left the house and I cried. And that whole time period of my life is a blur. Like I was in so much pain, it's almost like blocked out from my memory. And just whole worldview shattered, in an instant. And me and my mom spent tons of time crying. My sister and I cried. My sister was more absent at the time because she was in the midst of stuff she was going through. And yeah, just insane amount of hurt. And so from then on started my journey of like really diving into drugs because I just didn't, I lost care of anything in life. Like I think my worldview was so shattered because my dad was always this like symbol of strength to me. And he never alluded to me that he was depressed or anything like that. And so it just taught me a lot about life in a really dark and heavy way. And so from then on, I was like on my own. My mom was the teacher. She was gone most of the day. I'd already been kind of like selling weed, but I started selling drugs. I started doing a lot more drugs. I got introduced to Xanax, and that was the drug that I liked the most. I think when I experimented with it because it just made me feel completely numb. And like I've always been kind of a high strung, high anxiety person, and so um, Xanax just wiped my slate clean. And so at the time in high school and stuff like that, I did a lot of that. And I was already discovering music a little bit before my dad had passed, but I really got heavy into music. And so it was these two worlds that were going at the same time, like this music journey that I was on where I was writing deeper, more meaningful music, and then this street life because kids never fail to like emulate their parents. I really wanted to be like my dad, and I just had this like, fuck it, life doesn't matter mentality. I didn't think I would live very long, and I didn't care to live very long, and so I just, lots of drugs and lots of just dumb stuff that could have all ended badly, riding around with guns and robbing people and getting robbed and selling drugs and just all these things that were so dumb and so short-sighted. And so I I I never like went crazy off the deep end. At least like after this initial period after my dad died, I had like this big spurt of it. And then it was just, when I'd get my hands on things, I smoked religiously, I drank every weekend, and I did drugs every time I could get my hands on them. And as I got older, like when I got out of high school, I tried going to college for like 2 semesters, and I ended up getting this bad motorcycle accident where I crashed a bike going like 70 on the highway. And after that, I was just like, I'm done with college. I'm gonna really give music my all. And so I dropped out of college, and I ended up getting signed by Birdman 6 months later, which was like a super random occurrence. I still to this day don't know why it happened to me at that time, but it was this like alley from the universe of just like, you need to head in this direction. And so I it was weird at the time because it was this big goal and dream that I had, but honestly at the time I was such a messed up kid, just like mentally. Like I didn't value my own life. I didn't understand about discipline and work and bigger vision and sacrifice. And so I just, I had this opportunity handed to me, but I was, still just a kid suppressing all of his emotions and his insecurities with drugs. And so every time on that label or that I was in Miami, I always like felt like a fraud. And not because of music or that I was in this environment I didn't feel a part of, but because I was getting all this outward praise from the label, from people around me, from friends, but internally I just felt like totally messed up. Like I just felt so unhappy and so depressed and lost. And so as the music career continued, I would just cover up more and more with drugs. And every time I was in the studio, I had to drink or smoke or pop something. Or when I was on tour, I had to I'd drink a bottle of Hennessy before every show on the Black Sheep 2 tour. And, lean was popular at that time. And we were drinking lean and doing Xanax. And like drugs were just totally circled in my creative realm. And it was like I needed drugs all the time to get creative. And so I would have these peaks of success where good things were happening, and then I would self sabotage and go into a depressing hole for like months at a time. And it was on and off like that for years. Like after Black Sheep 2, I had this great high and I was really proud of this album. And then I went on tour, and then I came back and I was just like tanked and totally in a depression. And it feels like every album would emerge to pull me out of some sort of long-standing depression that I was in. Like between Black Sheep 2 and Black Sheep 3, long-standing depression. Between Black Sheep 3 and No Apologies or Generation, these long stints of depression. And I was still using drugs all the time to create, and taking Molly and uppers and downers. And even though I was never into uppers because I had so much anxiety, if I took them in the studio I would create great things, and then I would need to drink or take Xanax to come down or drink lean. And so it was this big cycle. And eventually I moved to LA and to just further pursue my music career. And it continued out there. Like LA cocaine was popular, and I never liked that drug. It felt like every time that I did that, I felt like my skin was crawling. I felt like so insecure about my life, and but I still did it, and I would just couple it with drinking or couple it with something that was a downer to like offset it. And it was just this habit of like, that was the culture out there. And so my whole time in LA was like I was in the studio all the time, but again, the same thing where like I couldn't really elevate in my life because I had so much inward turmoil. And yeah, just it's a lot of those stories. Like I could go on and on about them, but the real gist of it was that I was in the studio multiple times a week, and to do studio or videos or anything, I put on this facade of being confident or happy, but it was all drug fueled, and I was really alone and depressed and lost. And I had all sorts of addictions. Like I was addicted to drugs. I was addicted to drinking. I was addicted to smoking. I was addicted to sex and porn and just anything, and eating, like anything that was an escape from my reality. It's weird. It's like the work that I would do, like in the studio or creating videos or anything like that. It was like these short glimpses of confidence because I was high or drunk or whatever during them, and there was these long winds of depression and anxiety and just feeling so, you know, not right within myself. And so eventually I came to this point out there where I was like, I really need to change. Like, I'm going to commit suicide, or I'm not going to enjoy my career. I'm going to keep self sabotaging if I don't get clean. And right around this time, my brother Anonymous had sent me this dude, Wes Watson, on YouTube. It was like a dude fresh out of prison and did 10 years in prison, and he was this like fitness coach and mindset coach, and he put out these YouTube videos, tons of videos talking about his stay in prison, how he changed his life and his mentality. And he was so aggressive, and it was like this like male role model figure that I needed in my life because I didn't have a lot of those. And so he was giving me these hard truths of like, if you use drugs, you're a bitch, and like you're selfish if that's what your life is about, and all these things, and put them in a real clear and concise way. And I just became obsessed with these videos. I would watch them every day, and I watched them for a long time before I even decided to get sober. And what it was doing is I was like reconstructing my own inner voice instead of what it normally was, which was depressed and insecure and all these things. I was reconstructing this inner guiding voice with his voice of being like, life's not about you. If a man is right, his world will be right. Don't convince your heart or your mind of what your heart knows is a lie. All these things. And I would take these gems and I would listen and listen and listen. And so eventually that like pushed me to start this process of getting sober. And so it started out as just a 30-day thing. I was like, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to do drugs for 30 days. Let's see what happens. And that was all it took. Like 30 days turned into 60 days, turned into 90 days. And it was really weird at first because like going back into the studio, I would see bottles of Ciroc and my mouth would salivate, or I'd see drugs and I'd be like, I should do this. And it after I got over this 3-month hump, I was like off to the races. I didn't want to do that stuff anymore. And I started really reconstructing who I thought of myself as. And I started getting in the gym. I started waking up early. But it was the inner dialogue in my head was like, I don't use drugs anymore. I don't drink anymore. I'm not someone that does that. I'm becoming the man I always needed in my life, because I think as I can really mostly only speak to men, but I think as men, that quote of that Wes said of become the man you always needed in life was like the most impactful thing I'd ever heard, because I can construct who my dad was, and then I could write out who my dad needed to be for me to be a better man. And so the whole goal now is to turn myself into that guy. All the things that I admire in life, whether it's financial success or physical fitness, or if it's just your mentality and how you provide, or being loyal to your woman, whatever these qualities were, I was going to construct that guy and turn into him. And that changed my life. And so I went on this journey, and I've never touched a drug again since then. It was I'm probably messing up the date. It was July 15th or June 15th. I'd have to look at the Facebook posts. I don't really count the days, but I never touched a drug again. And my life slowly started to get better. I dropped better music. I slowly got reacquainted with being in the studio and being creative. And for a long time, I'd connected creativity with drugs, and so I felt like I needed drugs to be creative. And what I found when I got sober was that that's always inside of me. I'm always tapping into this source. And really what happens is that once I get over the gap of being used to the drugs, once I get away from that and I really get back in the flow of being creative, which took some time, I could get right into it easier, and I could come out of it easier, and I wouldn't regret. When I was in LA and I was doing drugs, like I'd be in the studio till 3, 4, 5 a.m. I'd drive home so depressed. I'd go home, I'd watch porn or do something, and then pass out and wake up the next day at 5 p.m. And it was just the worst cycle. And so I started getting up earlier, and I would repeat these phrases to myself of like, I'm not somebody that does this. And I really changed who I was. And a big part of it too for me, I always hear people in like the AA world or NA world, when I would go to meetings with my sister, I would always hear people say like, you have to get sober for yourself first. And I understand that mentality, and I'm sure there's truth to that, but a big thing that I heard that changed me was like, life's not about you. And for me, having motivators that were bigger beyond myself were actually more powerful. I had a 2-year-old nephew at the time, and I was like, do I want my nephew to grow up and maybe he was 1 year old. I'm like, do I want my nephew to grow up and go down the same path that I did, or my sister did, or my dad did? Or do I want to become somebody so influential in his life that he thinks that shit is so lame and he's just going to be a good person his whole life? And, I have a mother. Do I want to continue to perpetuate her pain and suffering? I want to be married and have a family. Like, what's the example? What about my homies that are going through this stuff? And so my life became way less about me and my own pleasures. And I feel like when you're the most depressed in life. Like when your life is all about you, when it's all about your pleasures, what you're going through, the more we make life about ourselves, the more depressing it becomes. And my life got exponentially better, exponentially more powerful when I thought about the other people in my life and what I wanted to become for them. And so that was the biggest thing for me. I would say that to myself every morning when I got up. early and I was so tired, I would just be like, it's not about you. This is not about you. It's not about you. Fuck what you want. Fuck who gives a fuck what you want. Like, if I just chased my own pleasures in life, I would be fat as fuck. I would be a sex addict. I would be a drug addict. And then nobody in my life would feel positively toward me or feel like I changed their life. And in doing so, since the 4 years of being sober, I've influenced so many people from my following to my immediate life to get better. So many. And I'm like, man, am I going to continue down this path of romanticizing the troubled artist and the drug addict artist? And all these things were things I romanticized as a kid. Like, I was like, I'm troubled. I've been through so much shit. I'm depressed. And that's why I got to take drugs. And I like literally, there was this sick part of my mind that, like, even though those things were true, I romanticized it and I made it more appealing than it was. And really, when I let go of that, that changed my life. When I was like, I don't want to perpetuate that. I want to, if there's 100 kids that listen to me, I want them to know that drugs fucked my life up, and going down these things made me so depressed and almost cost me my life. And that getting sober really, really was the number one thing in me addressing losing my father and these things, these insecurities and feelings of unworthiness that I felt growing up. And these were all things that I had to readdress once I got sober, because all those years of using, I never healed from losing my dad. Every Father's Day after that, when I got sober, I cried so hard. And I could cry right now thinking about my dad, because he was my favorite person. Even in amidst all the drugs and stuff, he was the person I loved most in life. And I just think, like, man, I wish more than anything that he would have, like, put all his effort into getting sober, because he has no idea how much me and my sister and my mother and everybody in his life miss him so much, and would have done anything to, like, help him, but would have been so inspired if he had got his shit together. And so, we can't turn back the hands of time, and I pray and talk to him all the time. And but I know he's proud looking at my journey, because I could have easily gone down that path. And I've become the man in my family, and I've become engaged, and I'm the man in my circle of friends and influence in my family, because I've really gone through hell and back, and committed to a life of, like, I'm never gonna do those things again. I'm never gonna drink again. I'm never gonna smoke again. I'm never gonna do drugs. And it's like I just put down. I'll talk a little bit about, like, the slip ups, because I don't want everybody to think it was just like this easy. So since I got sober, I never used drugs again. But I did have a couple of slip ups with alcohol, like maybe 4 or 5 times over the 4 years. And, like, every time it was just me testing the waters of, like, can I dip my feet back in this? And every time I was so full of regret. Like, I'm just here to say it. Once you start the journey, Wes said something that always stuck with me, which was like, it's the law of exposure, of, like, once you've been exposed to something, you can't unsee it. And so when you get sober and you start walking this better path, when you slip up, it hurts 20 times more. Like, so I dropped this album, Fine Art. I was in Vegas celebrating. I was maybe a year sober or something like that. I don't remember the exact dates. But I was like, I'm going to drink tonight and celebrate. And I got absolutely plastered that night. And I ended up, like, losing jewelry. I fought my engineer in the hotel lobby of the Cosmo. I got banned for life from the Cosmo in Las Vegas, which is so embarrassing, in my boxers. Like, just shit show. Like, it's funny to talk about, but, like, it's embarrassing. Like, when you really think about that, I'm like, God, I was such a shit show. I got banned from there for life. I woke up feeling so shameful, so regretful, and I got immediately back on the path, because I was so depressed from that. And every slip up was like that. Like, one time I was in Nashville and I was working with Wolf on music, and I decided to get a bottle of wine, and next thing you know, I'm 2 bottles of wine deep, and I'm just a mess. I was used to getting up at 5 and going to work out, and I slept in, and I ate pizza, and I just felt like shit. And I woke up feeling so shitty about myself. Like, shittier than I ever had felt. And it was because God, or the universe, whatever you want to call it, had exposed me to what it feels like not being on those things, and shown me the path. And I knew that that was the path that I had to walk, but instead I backtracked. And when you start to backtrack, once you've led down the path, it hurts 10 times more. And so you got to just keep walking the path. And, you know, I came back from that wolf session. I knew I never wanted to drink again. And I had a friend, Lucas Mack, who's like a breathwork specialist, like a spiritual guru to me. And he came home and he walked me through this long breathwork session, and I found peace again. And we revisited conversations with my dad and like feeling worthy. And that's a whole topic for another time. But I left that being like, I know that this is the path that I have to go on, and I can't ever look back. And you know, I even like put down smoking weed at that time, and I ended up making, this isn't even my final forms, one of my favorite albums I've ever made, one of the most impactful pieces of art I've ever made. And you know, I'm not here to like judge anybody that smokes or drinks. Like, it's not really about that. This is just like, if you have some sort of inner calling that's telling you your life would be better without these things, then follow it. This is just encouragement to follow that, because look, some people can drink recreationally and not feel bad about themselves, not act the asshole. Some people smoke because they need it for medical things, or they just enjoy it and it doesn't fuck their life up. And that's totally fine. You know, I'm not here to make any blanket statements. I will say that like drugs for sure ruin your life, and they're a net negative. They never make your life better. And really, any like time that you're trying to escape yourself using a substance, like there's some element there of like there's something that you need to work on. And so I can only speak from my perspective. Like, my life got better exponentially, 100,000% when I put down drugs, 100,000% when I put down alcohol, and even personally for me, better when I stopped smoking weed, because I just stopped escaping, you know. And all these things, like I don't know what the point of this video was to make. I felt some sort of download today to make this and just say that, like, I know people out there are struggling with this. I struggled with this for so long, and like, you can change all the time, and you have to change the inner dialogue that you have with yourself. Because if I would have just told myself, I'm a troubled artist, I'm an addict, my dad was an addict, my family's addicts, I would have continued down that path. And what I had to tell myself was like, no, this is a choice, and I can suffer through the healing process to get clean. I can become a better person. Life is not about me. If a man is right, his world will be right. All these things that I told myself, and just really that it's not about me, and I need to become the man that I always needed in my life, because that's what other people need from me. And the same goes true for you, whether you're a man or a woman. Like, people in your life are looking to you as an example of what's okay and what's possible. And some people don't have a lot of examples of what's possible. I didn't have a lot of examples of people that overcame really hard shit, transformed their life, went from 0 to 60, and in a positive way. And like, that's what like Wes Watson was for me, finding him on the internet. And so I think it's important that you never know what people are lacking in their life. I lacked those male role models in my life so hard till I was fucking 25, 26, 27. You know, I lacked really solid examples of what a man is. And we a big this is the last thing that I'll say before this is done, but like, a big part that our society is missing is these like rituals and rites of passage for men or boys to become men. And so as a kid, you're trying to figure it out. I was a boy all the way till I was 26, 27, because that's when I let go of my boyish ways. You know, when you become a man, you let go of childish things. And for me, that was like self-servingness, manipulation, and feeling like a victim in my life, and lacking discipline, and all these things. Becoming a man is saying that I am responsible for my life, the people in my life. I'm responsible for how I influence them, what I preach, what I do. And it takes it, you know, it's so cliche, but it takes discipline, and it takes these things that you don't want to do. You know, discipline is choosing something that's harder right now for a better outcome in the long run, and sacrifice. Like, instead of doing drugs, which is an immediate pleasure, and then regretting it for all this time, you know, I choose running toward growth. And when I chose, you know, when I got sober, and I had to find new things to do with all this pain. And I used to just go numb it out with all the things I mentioned earlier. And once I aimed it at things that were growth oriented, like going on walks, going to work out, watching positive content, making positive videos, talking to people in my life, reading, growing, learning. Every time I was in a really painful state where I would normally go use drugs, I would just go do one of those things. Like, if every time you were depressed, you just hit the ground and did like 200 burpees, like, I know it sounds corny, but that really will like change your frequency at the moment. And you have to positively act yourself out of negative thoughts. That was another big gem I learned from Wes, was like, you can't just think yourself out of negativity. You have to positively act it. So just saying you're going to get sober and all these things wasn't enough, because you need tools to couple it with. And so I coupled those with physical activity. You know, you go for a run, you go hit a workout, you do burpees, you do push-ups, pull-ups, whatever it is. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. But every time you're hurting, if you run to that, you will have immense change in your life. And I just encourage anybody that's following me, I just encourage you to like seek the best version of yourself, and to just know that this life is super short. You know, we can lose it at any moment, and all the people in your life are just looking to you, and you would be so surprised at how much more you can give, and how positively you influence the people around you if you make those hard decisions. And so, you know, to anybody that's struggling with addiction right now, I just want to say, like, you can do this shit. You can do it right now. You could say in this video, I'm never using drugs again. That's what you tell yourself. And every time you're tempted, you say, I don't do that. I will never do it again, because this is the type of person I need to become. This is the type of person I needed in my life. And this shit is not about me. And yeah, I hope that does something for somebody, because getting sober really, really changed my life. I would not be here still if I hadn't got sober, if I hadn't focused on those things. And yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll do more of these, but I just felt like this message needed to be here, heard. So I love y'all. I hope that you have a fucking great life. Love y'all.